All right, G, let's start. What has changed? हमने अभी तारुफ किया, हमने बातें की. She's become a teacher already, and she's studying HR as well, and she was a housewife. That's change. You're a lawyer, sir, and you're studying HR. That's a huge change, I'm sure. This is how the Oxford Language Dictionary defines change. Just take a look at it. Replace something, could be anything, with something else, especially something of the same kind that is newer or better, a substitute for that thing. Are we clear on what change is? So it also means that one would not like to go back to something which was not better, right? This is something that I'd like all of you to do. Please cross your arms in whatever way that you're comfortable. Cross your arms in whatever way that you're comfortable. Whatever way you're comfortable, just cross your arms. You too. Are you comfortable that way? Thank you. Arms crossed. Let's keep it that way. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Acceptance versus resistance. This covers like more than 100 years, right? And there's a point that I'm trying to make, so I hope you bear with me as I go along. In 1876, from the British Post Office, William Pearce, he said, the Americans have need of the telephone, but we do not. We have plenty of messenger boys. 1876. Do you see the change right now around you? Galat sabit hua na? 1889, Thomas Edison. We all know who Thomas Edison is, right? Very smart, intelligent inventor, holder of a lot of patents. Fooling around with alternative current, AC current, the one that we use in our homes, is just a waste of time. Nobody will use it ever. Same. 1903, and this is the president of the Michigan Savings Bank advising Henry Ford's lawyer not to invest in the Ford Motor Company. The horse is here to stay, but the automobile is only a fad, a novelty, a phase. 1921. Are you aware who David Sarnoff is? Okay, as I say, he's an American businessman, which is quite clear. But he's also one of the early investors in the radio business. The wireless music box, which he's referring to the radio, has no imaginable commercial value. Who would pay for a message sent to no one in particular? Does that ring a bell nowadays? Yeah. You know, we've come a long way from radio to Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. You're sending messages to literally nobody and you get following and there you go, viral. 1946, 20th Century Fox, Darryl. He says, television won't be able to hold on to any market it captures after the first 6 months. 1946, and he's talking about the 6 months. People will soon get tired of staring at a plywood box every night. I think we've come a long way from a plywood box, but essentially the same box. 1966, and this one was of personal interest to me. Time magazine published and wrote, remote shopping, while entirely feasible, will flop. And besides Amazon, we've got our own local examples, right? We've got Draz.pk, we've got Dukan, and I'm sure we've got multitude others that haven't gotten that, but is a thing of the future right now. 1995, Robert Metcalfe. Anybody familiar with him? IT people? If you ever look up for Metcalfe's law. This guy was one of the founders of the internet. He basically was a partner in inventing Ethernet. The internet, the cable that we use. This guy, founding father in a way of internet, said, I predict the internet will soon go spectacularly supernova and in 1996, catastrophically collapse. 2005, now this is very recent, cool for all of us. Steve Chen, CTO and co-founder of YouTube, expressing concerns about his company's long-term viability, said, there's just not that many videos I want to watch. In 2006, a year after that comment, Google bought YouTube for $1.65 billion. Do you think that's a lot of money? No. In 2021, YouTube earned $28.84 billion for that 1 year through ads alone. 2007, Steve Ballmer, Microsoft CEO. There's no chance that the iPhone is going to get any significant market share. As of 2021, in the US market, iPhone is the number one shareholder with 23.4% of the market. The second number is with Samsung at 19%. Now, I would like you to cross your arms in a different way than before. The interesting thing that I want to point out here is you fold your arms in one manner. All of us fold our arms in one manner in which we're comfortable. Some people would fold their arms this way. Some people will fold it this way. But the moment we are asked to fold our arms in a different manner, for a moment we're like, how do I do this? And we also feel a little uncomfortable inside because this is not what we're used to. It's not our muscle memory. If that kind of a small change is bothering you, imagine what an actual huge change is going to do to you or your organization. So what do we realize out of this little tiny bit of exercise? We should be ready for change. Only the prepared survive. While predictions are a maybe, as we saw, a lot of predictions, some could have come true, some couldn't. Being reactive and adaptive to change increases our chances of survival. Little change can make one uncomfortable. Imagine large changes, and this is what change management is all about. Now, talking about change, these are the questions you should ask yourself. Itasani, I'm not going to go forward. I'd like you to tell me what kind of questions would you ask before I go to the next slide. If we're talking about change, and I'll give you an example. For example, you're a lawyer and you use books to keep track of different court cases, dates and stuff. You have ledgers or file cabinets in the office where you keep all the stuff. An IT person comes to you and says, you know what, I'll install this app for you and this app will do all of this for you. Why do I want something to change? So the first question would be, why would I use this app? My work is fine. I've been using it for the last 10 years. No problem so far. Why should I use it? You've seen this latest app, you'll see the ads on TikTok and Instagram, Khata.pk. And it has all these shopkeepers and entrepreneurs and talking about, aapka khayal hai, hamara khata nahi hota, hamara khata hota. And this has made my life easier. And I can claim this and that and all that stuff. What are they trying to do through that ad? Why are they getting entrepreneurs? Why are they getting people that are day-to-day businessmen? Why are they engaging that kind of figures? Just like if you see an ad for Ariel or any other household item, most likely what you'll see in the ad is a housewife, right? Even in the ad where I think it was Ariel's ad in which this mother and her son go to a restaurant and the lady who's waiting there spills something and I think there's a series of ads, but they ended up getting married. While that may not be true, however, what they're doing is they're trying to change the psychology and approach of people by taking it little increments at a time. So it's nothing phenomenally different from what we do. We all know what happens when we go to a marriage. You go to a family marriage, all the old ladies over there, all they're doing is इसकी शादी उससे करवा देते हैं, उसकी इससे करवा देते हैं, नहीं ये अच्छा होगा, वो बुरा होगा. Just like if you end up being with the uncles, all they're talking about, इसकी नौकरी क्या है, ये कितने पैसे बनाता है, वो कितने पैसे बनाता है, इसको इस कारोबार में लगा दो. And you have all these examples. So these are typical things that these people would pick up, and then they would develop ads which do slight incremental changes in the psychology. And change management is majorly about incremental changes. Now, once you've decided why you want to change something, the next question is there any benefit in this change? As you said, does this change mean something better? If it doesn't mean better, you're least likely to adapt it, right? What do I feel about this change? Ask yourself that. What do I feel about this change? If it's an organization, if it's personal life, whatever it is, ask yourself how you feel about that change, right? For an instance, if I were to give you an example right now, you all are seated where you are. If I were to ask you to stand up and sit back there, just like that, how likely are you to just do it? You'd probably be staring at me like, what has he said, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, this is an open dialogue. Most likely the chances are you'll just be staring at my face. The reason is you have no background and you have no reason, right? So how do I feel about this change? Again, for instance, if there's somebody here who's sitting on a seat that is uncomfortable, The moment this is said, that person is most likely to get up and quickly change his seat, right? Which gets us to a point which I'll discuss later on in the presentation about assessing the individual needs of people within your organization to make change more effective, right? What do the people around me feel about this change? Now you know what you feel. What about the people around you? And this applies to any entrepreneur, any businessman, any HR professional. You have to consider what the other people are feeling about that change. And you know what, as much as we'd like to say that, there are no emotions and feelings in business and all that, it's not true. Especially with HR, we deal with people every day. What do the people around me feel about the current situation? If you have a lot of people who like things as they are right now, you will be very ineffective in bringing about change, right? Important points. What are the driving forces behind the change? We're going to discuss this later. This is just for you to consume the pattern that we're going to follow. What is the likely impact of the change? Questions to ask yourself. What factors might determine its success? What are the key steps the business must take to ensure that change is successful? Do you disagree with any of these questions? We don't disagree so far. What is it to change? I'll go through a couple of things that I've read up just to make some sense out of it. Spencer Johnson, has anybody read the book, Who Moved My Cheese? I'll give you a quick summary of Who Moved My Cheese. This is a story about two mouse, cute little mouse. And every day they get up and they go in this maze and they see cheese every day, fresh cheese. Now one mouse, he goes there and eats cheese and he's like cool about it. The other mouse, he puts on his joggers and he puts on his tracksuit and every day he tries to figure out where the maze is leading to. And every day he finds something different, he gets stuck somewhere, then he comes back, then he takes something else. And when he tells this other mouse who's sitting with the cheese, hey, come on, we need to find a way out. He's like, hey, I've got all the cheese I want, I don't care. So this other mouse, tracksuit, joggers and all, keeps trying to find a way where eventually he finds a way out and there's a lot of cheese there. This guy, after some days, when he's totally used to it and he's getting fat, and then he notices that the cheese hasn't been replaced. He's like, okay, maybe they forgot, so I'll get some new cheese tomorrow. So he eats some and then he goes and sleeps. Next day, the cheese is getting a little more stale. The next day after that, it's really bad and he can't eat it. Now he's hungry. And so making an example out of that, that's when the mouse says, who moved my cheese? But taking no action for any future planning or the anticipation that this cheese might not be there tomorrow, right? And it's a pretty cool book to read. You can get free versions online. I would strongly recommend that you download that book and do read it. He says a very interesting thing in that book. What you are afraid of is never as bad as what you imagine. The fear you let build in your mind is worse than the situation that actually exists. A lot of times, because we fear the unknown, we create perceptions in our mind which makes us more fearful than we actually should be and more than the actual event is. And this is what happens. And this is also linked, and I'll get to that later, but I'll give you a little briefer right now. This is linked to how well you communicate the process with your teams. If you do not communicate the change process with your teams, with the people around you, this is what will happen to them. They will start assuming. They will start making up their own assumptions. And once that happens, it's a very dangerous and slippery path. To refuse to change is to be left behind. Anybody who disagrees with that? Feel free to disagree, it's okay. Virtually every organization will go through development and change at some point. Research. And I've quoted it here so you can always look up the paper. Now, when change happens, there's somebody who makes it happen on the ground. And who is that person? A change manager. So who is a change manager? A change manager is not an HR professional. A change manager can be an HR professional. He can be a line manager. He can be a CEO. He can be anybody. But this is the characteristics. He provides a structured approach to help people transition from the current state to the desired state. And obviously that's as a result of change. So we have that covered. And most importantly, as we continue on the path of change, always remember, you can't change people. The only thing that you can do is influence them. Types of change. I'd like you to take just a moment to go through this list. This is not comprehensive, but I think it covers pretty much most of the types of changes that are possible. Size of change, organization-wide. Pretty clear by the word itself. Transformational. You're doing something today, and you'd like to transform into something else, right? It could be organization-wide. It could be operational. It could be within a certain subsection of a certain department. Personal change. Individuals. Unplanned. Something just happened and now you must change if you want to survive.
Immediate.
Yes. And you'd have to react to it, right? Which is also kind of reactive. Something happened and now you need to change because of that. Then there's remedial. What is remedial change?
It is mandatory to.
No, not really. No, remedial would be in sense a mistake happened. Yeah. So a mistake happened.
Overcome.
Yeah, in order to overcome that mistake, now you'd like to do something to correct it. So that's remedial. These are actually all offshoots of those main categories, right? And they just go into deeper detail. I'll tell you, for example, let's discuss transformational. You guys might be able to better understand the example, but it's for everybody. When I was much younger, I remember there used to be this product from Johnson & Johnson. It was a baby lotion, pink-colored lotion in a pink-colored bottle. I hope we all remember. So way back then, they wanted to increase their market share. And they didn't understand how to do it because they had the baby product market and that's what they were, Johnson & Johnson baby products. They did a consumer focus group. And what they learned from that was that a lot of the teenage girls at that time were using the baby lotion as a moisturizer. And apparently they loved the product. And that's when they said, let's transform into another unit. So they made this beauty products unit that took the same product, the same baby lotion, bottled it differently, marketed it differently, and boom. That's when Johnson & Johnson Cosmetics and Beauty Products launched itself. So this is how it happens. Sometimes you look at the market and you plan it. So this was, for example, planned or developmental, right? Similarly, sometimes it's strategic. And you know what the issue with strategy is? And we'll cover that in a minute. Can anybody tell me an issue with strategic change or strategy in general? Okay, let's ask the first question. Do you think strategy is good? We all agree? All right. What's the bad thing about strategy? Strategy is wonderful for the time that it was brought in, but it has an expiration date. And we have to accept that. The same strategy that worked wonders 50 years ago may not work at all right now, right? The same strategy that worked for her company may not work for my company and vice versa, right? Peter Drucker, he coined a term called age of discontinuity to describe the way in which disruptive change affects us. In his model, he talks about 4 sources of discontinuity. 4 sources. And you'll be surprised they're so common. Globalization. For example, in the United States, at McDonald's, and we all been to McDonald's, right?
Yes.
All of us?
Yeah.
What we see is McDonald's is the same globally, right? I've been to many different countries, and no matter where you go, you can get the Golden Arches like a mile away, right? You go to the actual site, and it's the same structure, the same uniform, the same kind of behavior, more or less. Right? But what is different is the subtle things. For example, due to globalization, they also found they had to use different business strategies. As an example, even though they have more or less the same menu, we don't have bacon in Pakistan. They have veggie choices in India. In the United States, a large cup is this large. In France, a large cup is this large because of the people's appetite there, right? So they had to adjust. Cultural pluralism. This is a cool one. Any idea? And it's all around us. It is all around us. What this means is that we have one main culture and a lot of subcultures that are minorities, But within that subculture, they have their unique identity. So now when you're looking and talking about change, you need to understand those dynamics. You cannot have one comprehensive policy that you put on everybody, right? And you need to understand those minorities. So that's where it comes as a pluralism, right? Knowledge capital. Anybody use Google or YouTube to learn anything? Yes. Anybody use Udemy? Do you remember Linda?
Yes.
Do you know what Linda is now? LinkedIn Learning. They bought Linda. And you know what was interesting? When Linda was alone as a standalone company, their courses were very affordable, very similar to Udemy or Coursera. But since LinkedIn's bought them, they've changed the entire structure. Now they're rather expensive. But what they've further done is change again, that now they've linked the courses and their completion to individual accounts. So what will happen is, for example, you log into LinkedIn and you go to LinkedIn Learning and you take a course. First, it will see if that course has any relevance to you and your profile. And then it will try to add on something to your profile. And so much so, if they see that a person has taken on a course or a series of courses that have nothing to do with what he's doing, you're more likely to get an email, just like you get a message on Instagram saying it's against our community standards, this post and all, and we're taking it down. You now get an email from LinkedIn saying, are you the same person? Please provide us your national ID card and verification that this is you. Because a lot of people, by the way, did that, where one account and then there are a lot of people doing courses on the same account, right? So anyways, so now knowledge capitals. That has really disrupted the way that these things used to happen. Once upon a time, many years ago, there used to be a group of small people who knew how to read or write. There was a small group of people who would be the custodians of knowledge, but now it's everywhere.
Who's a knowledge hub?
Everybody. I've got 10-year-old people, little kids, little people, who are right now developing AI-based programs.
Right.
There are these 12, 13-year-old kids who are working on Python and developing optical recognition platform for drones.
Right.
Kids, I'm not even talking about companies or people with a lot of resources. Kids, simple laptop, some even with just a mobile phone. And they're working on it. And this is what has happened because of knowledge capitals, access to everybody, and new technologies. And this is change that we need to consider. Another change that I just can't live without mentioning is, for example, I went through almost 1.5 years of working from home. And one interesting thing that I got from a lot of my students at university was that whenever we are home, our parents are like, "Yeah, just sauda le aao." And they're like, "I have a class." I'm like, it's okay, just go. Ghar pe baithe, kuch bhi nahi kar rahe. And this also happened with a lot of people who were working from home. I mean, it didn't happen with me, thank God, but it happened with a lot of people that I know. If they're at home and they're working, that's not considered working. Yeah. Whereas, I'm sure you all know, when we were working from home, we were probably working twice as much. We agree on that.
More than the working hours.
A lot more than the working hours. But that's the perception. Normally, the people I'm talking about are our parents. They're in a different age group. We're in a different age group. My kids, on the other hand, are in an absolutely different age group. My kids were born in, with a mobile in their hands. For them, it's not even technology, it's just everyday thing. I got my first computer when I was I think 11, 12 years old. And for my older cousins, that was like, wow, amazing. You've got a computer so early. We got it when we were doing engineering at UET. And even then, like 3 people in our class had a computer. But then come to the generation now, they're born and they get a mobile. By the time they're 10, they have their own mobile. There are child-specific platforms. There are games, there are communities targeted at children. This is how important that demographic is. And we, as people who are either catering to those kids or to the younger generation in our organizations, we have to be aware of these changes that are happening. As an instance, A fresh software engineer who joins a company, his first target after 6 months of employment is what? A software engineer, a fresh software engineer, or for that matter, mostly all other fresh graduates that join a company, the first 6-month target, commercially speaking, is what? And I'll give you a hint, to purchase something. What would they love to purchase after 6 months?
Car.
Car, all right. What else?
Laptop.
Okay.
MacBooks, kind of.
Yeah, you're getting close.
iPhone.
iPhone. See, I've seen kids who are making what, 70, 80, maybe 100,000 a month. And their 6-month target is to get an iPhone 13 Max Pro or something. And they'll have it. The second target is to lease a car. The third target, after the car and the mobile.
Be an entrepreneur.
No. Apple, the watch, the Apple smartwatch. That too is not cheap, I tell you. And after all these 3 targets are met, the house is still nowhere there. Then it's other things, like, okay, let's upgrade the car. And interesting thing is, back in my days, when I was a kid, I guess, but when I was in college, kids my age, they used to, if they had a car, they would install woofers and sound systems, and that was like the thing of the day. Nowadays, when you look at kids, they have no interest in that. The simple stereo system in the car is cool enough for them. Or they'll have their Bluetooth headsets and they're cool with life. Preferences change. And the only reason that they're going to be better is because they in fact are more adaptive to change than perhaps we are. Right? As an example, in case there's only 2 people in this class who are talking about Python. Whereas if you ask me in all frankness, everybody should have a go at Python. Everybody. It requires no background in software engineering or coding. All you need to do is watch a couple of tutorials on YouTube and you can start. And nobody said your first program has to compete with Microsoft. Simple programs. My first program that I wrote was actually Hello World.
It's usually the first.
Yes.
Easiest one.
And see, whether it's easy or not, the point is, the satisfaction that you get out of running something is just like creating something. So anyways, moving on. There are some other interesting theories that I personally like, and I'll mention them, but there are lots of theories. You can always read about them. Alvin Toffler talks about future shock. This guy wrote a book, and you should read it whenever you get the time. While the book covers a lot of things and a futurist world and all that, the bottom line there is what we were just talking about now. If my grandfather were to come back on Earth today and look around and see mobile phones, see us communicating across the world in like moments. And it's not that long ago. I was in Canada in the early 2000s, right? And my mom used to try to call me there. And first, this is the beginning when the internet was not so cool in Pakistan. So they'd have to book a trunk call and then wait for it to connect. And then finally they'd get to talk for 2 or 3 minutes max. Expensive affair. Then they moved on to these OneNet, OneNet.pk, I'm sure you guys must have heard of it. BrainNet ke saath, there was OneNet. World Call at that time, yep. And these internet providers sold internet service by the hour. So I don't know, if it was 200, 300, 400 rupees, at one point 500 rupees, you'd get 1 hour. And then you had these internet services that would allow you telephonic calls, VoIP. We've all heard of VoIP, right? Voice over Internet Protocol. So, and that came. Then I was back here. Now when, for example, I talk to my sisters, and my sisters are all abroad, so I'm the only one here. And so I just pick up the call and video call. Instantaneous. Like my niece is in UK and she's like, oh, I want to talk to Mamu. And the next instant, video call, and she's talking to Mamu. Instantaneous. My grandfather, if he came today, would have a huge, huge shock. He might not even be able to accept it. He'd be like, oh, witchcraft. But what at one point in time was assumed to be witchcraft is today's reality. What today we might assume to be witchcraft is going to be the future. That's how it is. Malcolm Gladwell talks about tipping points. Can anybody give me one example from current scenario about tipping points? Tipping points are talking about the critical mass where something goes viral, in the easiest terminology to explain. This is what happens in an organization.
Something snowball effect type.
Yes, like a snowball. What happens in an organization is what you're looking at is to create enough of a mass communication and interest and get enough people on board at a certain point, which is your tipping point. That's when it takes over as a life of its own, and that's where it goes viral, so as to say. And that's what happened. This video comes out. They're like 50, 60, 100, 200 people. And then at one point, suddenly it's like all over the globe. Yeah. And that's your tipping point. Gary Hamel talks about strategic decay. And this is what we were talking about earlier. A great strategy today would live its life, and that's it.
Be expired and
Yes.
need that connection.
So we should be ready to strategize, get feedback, reevaluate, and re-strategize. And this is what basically he talks about. Somebody once gave me an example, and I'd love to share it with you. Somebody said, from the time that the dinosaurs roamed the earth, way back, all the way to the first time that we recorded history, about 10,000 years ago, right? Long time. And then from the time that we recorded history, the technological advances, and see, technology is not just gadgets or electronics. Every age and era had their own technology. The papyrus reed paper in its time was their latest technology. The Rosetta Stone written in mud at its time was their best technology. The pyramids, when they were made, best technology. So let's not confuse the word technology with just electronic items. Yeah. So the advancements in the respective technologies that took place in all that time frame, it has exponentially shrunk, right? Which kind of goes to your question about strategy. We've come from the first manned flight to trip on moon, from a simple rocket that went like a few miles ahead to intercontinental missiles. We've come from one telephone or telegram or Morse code stuff to mobile phones, satellite phones, video calls, laptops. I'm sure you all remember from, I don't know, maybe you guys don't, but some of us might remember way back in the days when computers used to be huge. So see, what I'm trying to say is, I'm just talking about desktop computer. So supercomputers today as well occupy a huge amount of space. Why? Because a supercomputer 20 years ago had different parameters for evaluation. Today it has different. And when you look at the parameters, they've shifted quite a bit. We're talking about each of us holding a mobile phone which has quadruple processors. Quadruple processors in our hand. And the computer that got us to the moon, anybody know how much RAM that computer had? I don't know, take a guess.
500 MB.
Not even MBs, dude. Literally in the kilobytes. Now we're talking about GBs and terabytes. I mean, I'm just an ordinary person and I've got 1 terabyte of storage that I pay for. And it's like commonplace.
Yes.
Everybody has that. Now there are services that give you maybe 500, 700 GB free.
Yes.
And we're talking about going to the moon at 4 kilobytes.
4 KBs.
Yeah. And they managed to do it all. They went to the moon, they came back alive. So what do we learn out of all of this?
Changing the only constant.
So everything is absolutely and always changing. Darwin, I'm not sure if anybody's a fan of Darwin, but he did say something interesting because he was so much into animals. And an interesting fact which I read, I can't confirm, but I read it somewhere. Every single animal species that he discovered and wrote about, he also ate them. Every single one, from insects to mammals. So talking about change. Darwin said, it is not the smartest or the strongest of species that will survive, but the most adaptable ones.
They must be adaptive to be survived into any other, like,
Yes.
The other word, survival of the fittest.
Ji sir?
Survival of the fittest.
Yeah, survival of the fittest is more of a saying, but if you turn out into the essence of survival long term, it's adaptable. And so that's why when you talk about fit, yeah, fit has a lot of parameters evaluating it. So fitness would include a person's adaptability. I would not consider fitness to be fitness without being adaptable. And the reason, it's like saying, in the recent times, you would have seen a lot of movies coming out from different countries about their Olympic winners, especially the ones from the 40s and 50s, 1940s and 50s. And you see these person coming on and there's no funding and they're poor, but they're really athletic and fit and everything. And they'd come on with torn slippers or 2 different shoes and that kind of stuff. And then finally at the last moment, they'd probably get funding or good slippers. But they managed to get there by adapting to whatever they had, right? So yes, fitness is important, but adaptability goes a long way in that success. If you look at the animals in the last 100 years, that's as far back as I'll go, we have seen in our own lives animals who have gone extinct. And we also know the reason for that. An example in point, the recent COVID mandate to stay indoors. I'm sure we've all seen news from around the world on our computers where, for example, in Venice, in the canals, they've got dolphins emerging after hundreds of years. Why? Because of all the pollution and contamination that we as people have done. So nature brought them back. But at the same time, there's a lot of, for example, poaching in the sea, excessive fishing. And that's brought about change. So while that adaptation for some might be easier, but for a lot of other species, it wasn't. And unfortunately, we added as that kind of a change agent, which didn't help them. So I think they're better at adapting to change than we are. Have you ever heard of this phrase? The first 100 days. And I'm not talking about the PDI government, please, non-political. What does this mean? Where have you heard this? And I'll take the PDI government as an example, absolutely non-political, just based on reality. They said 100 days, we'll do this, right?
Yes.
Were they able to do it in 100 days?
No.
No, stick to that point. Usually, this is something that shows up in politics and organizations.
Definitely.
Whenever you get a new manager, a new CEO, a new head of department, but it's a myth. It's just face painting, nothing else. And why is that? As you said, probation. You're new. You want people to listen to you that you're going to do this and you're going to do that and it's going to be all amazing. But change takes time. It cannot happen overnight. And who says it can, will not. And the point in question, the current government, with all due respect to everybody in the government, if they had mandated that, we're going to make a change, we're going to change people, we're going to take the next 20 years, it would happen. Incremental steps, slowly and steadily, people would change. But when you try to change people in 100 days, it doesn't work. Anybody want to contribute why it doesn't work on people?
Because I don't think so. Everyone likes to have the change because we are more.
Nobody
into our
likes change.
we are more into our comfort zones.
Yeah, very true, very true. We're all in our comfort zones. Nobody essentially likes change. But then when we talk about the 100 days, it sounds exciting, right? And it's very short term. So like, oh, they cling it. 100 days, it's just around the corner. But then after 100 days, there's another 100 days. And then another 100 days. And there a year has passed away. These are some of the various approaches and steps in the change management process. You might like this. Identification. This is where you start. Problem? Need. All right, you could look at process, yeah. But you're in the identification phase, which is what? Exploring. Looking around. Does something need change? Do I need to change? Sometimes there's a problem and you look at that problem and that problem could be anything. Sales have come down. Organization, people are resigning. A lot of people are leaving. There's high turnover. You're not getting the right kind of candidates to join.
Retention problem.
No, retention problem. As a lawyer, you're not getting as many cases as you want. Not many people, doing illegal things, which would be nice, but and a lot of things like that.
You're not making the sales properly.
You're not making sales, yeah. Could be anything, right? So what do you do first? Scope.
Research.
And what is scope? We all know what is scope. I hope we all do, right? But what is it in our context? Scope is how far are you willing to go? Do you want to look at your department? Do you want to look at yourself? Do you want to look at the entire organization? Do you want to look at everybody in the country? You define a scope before you start. See, when I was doing research, one of the most important things that we used to start with is scope. If you want to do this research, is it going to be based in Lahore? Is it going to be based in Pakistan? Is it going to be the IT industry, the banking sector? Okay, let's say the banking sector. Is it going to be Islamic banking, conventional banking? Is it going to be credit? Is it going to be mutual funds? The better you define the scope and the better you identify that area, more likely is your success. And why is that? It's a simple question. You're identifying or in the identification phase of your issue and how you would start to tackle it. You've so far not planned anything, just looking at it. So first, as we had here, you look at the fact, is this something to do, let's say, with sales? Do we want to look at the sales department? Is this something to do with manufacturing? Is this something to do with the HR? Is this something to do with the market that we're sitting in? Do we want to change that? Define that scope. How large do you want to go? Second, look at your current state. Where are you right now? Right? Next, where do you want to be? Obviously, you've got something in mind, right? We all have ideas, or we have learned from somewhere. Then what do you want to accomplish? What are the results you're looking at? And see, how is it different from the previous number? How is it different from the future state? Future state is your desired state, right? What is the results? Tangible items that will help you achieve that state. And if you don't have something tangible, you can't achieve it. And something that I'm sure we have all heard multiple times, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Concept. Things you were talking about. Conceptualization. Concept. Could be this, could be that, that happened. Brainstorm. Talk to the stakeholders. Talk between people that you trust. Build a consensus. And this is just consensus on what the issue is, what the size of your redressal will be. We have not even started planning yet. We're still working on what the problem is, where do we want to be, what is it that will tell us that we have achieved a certain state, tangible results. Next, we come to the stage, presentation. And this is not the presentation that I'm sure we all think is. Process. What is process?
So basically a
Which
series of
steps
steps.
we take to change?
With steps, all right.
Initiative.
Initiative, fine.
Methods of working.
Methods of working, cool.
Reevaluate the processes.
Now we'll get to that. But yeah, you're in the right direction.
All steps from where we are going through.
Yeah, all the steps that we're going through, process. Information.
Gathering.
Okay, यार process हो गया. What is this information? ये तो same चीज़ नहीं होगी.
It's about gathering the data.
Yes, gathering data, information. This is all that you have. Obviously, if you don't know what's going on right now, what are you going to change? So you gather all the information that you can from all sources that you can, right? Then what do you do with that information? Why is risk analysis important in business? As with everything else in life, but in business.
If it change and implement करना चाह रहे हैं,
I'm sorry, just a second. You were saying?
if it gets failed,
If it gets failed, you're looking at the risk. Number one, if I change, what are the risks I'm looking at? If I don't change, what is the risk then? So you're looking at both the sides. So if I do, what's my risk? If I don't, what's my risk?
Pros and cons.
Pros and cons. If I do, what do I get? If I don't, do I get something out of that? Right? Most important for all of us, cost of the change. Sometimes some businesses have opted not to change because they've simply found the cost to be too much. This is where things like SaaS come in. You'd see, like, for example, in Pakistan, there was once olden days when people used to go and buy cars on cash. Remember those days? You might not, but I'm sure some of us might. I remember those days. We would go and buy a car in cash. Nowadays, the number of people going out and buying on cash has reduced drastically. A majority of people, especially those on the urban side, would use bank financing. Just like in the very, very recent time, the Prime Minister announced this housing scheme and the lucrative loans at low markup. And I know, for example, a lot of people that I know took up that option. They bought their own houses or they've started construction on their land by availing that opportunity. But there was a time in Pakistan where people would do it by cash. Now what's happened? The cost of making that change from, let's say, a person who's renting to a person who's an owner. The cost of going from a person who's commuting or using a bike to a person who has a car or his own car. Now it's like that has changed. They've made it into an installment. And that installment is more affordable on a monthly basis from your income, right? Planning. Now this is what we all wanted to come to. Can we have planning without clear steps?
No.
Yeah, I'd love to do an activity right now, but I don't have enough squares here. We'll do an activity a little later here, but I think that would be more interesting. Clear steps. The more defined and precise your steps are, more the probability for you to succeed in getting the change implemented. And never forget any detail. Whenever you feel, it's like, when you're doing your exams, metric, FSE, and you get numbers for steps. And even though your answer is right, if you miss a step, you lose marks.
Exactly.
This is what goes on here. Never assume your audience. Never make an assumption. Treat the entire audience as the worst person in the audience. So if you have, let's say, a company, and you've got a group of people that, let's say, are not as literate in all these terminologies, then the write-up that you do for the process of change to communicate should be very, very simple. So it's very easy for them to understand and maybe even easier for the other people to understand. But if you keep it difficult, assuming that people will just know what it is, you're going to lose out on a certain segment of your people. Analysis and measurement. For me, it's measurement first and analysis after that. But for a lot of writers, it's analysis first and measurement after that. But as different as our views might be, both of them are equally important. You have to decide what you're going to measure what you have, and then measure what you're going to do and how you're going to measure that. One of the most difficult things to measure in change management is change. And I know that sounds really weird because it's change management and it's really difficult to measure change. And why is that? There's some things we can tangibly measure. Bad sales, we want to improve sales, we did this. Sales are improved, good. We managed to change it. Business is going down, we changed this. Business is doing better, great.